I am so excited to start this conversation with Dr. Nasim Afsar, a good friend, a longtime friend at this point, and I know we're going to have a ton of things to talk about. But first, I have to tell you that you are such a colorful person in real life, metaphorically, figuratively, that I actually went and changed into bright green for you and for merge today. So I wanted to bring the color because you always bring the color. So I am glad to see you.
I love that. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today, Stephanie. And I
Well,
love the color.
good. I know it's merged too, but like, you're so colorful. So we've known each other for a while, but the reason that we're here today specifically is another thing that I absolutely love about you, which is that you've just written a book. So we're talking today about the book, but about a lot of topics that you and I have kind of covered over the past few years of our friendship, working together as colleagues. But let's start with your book. What's the title? What's it about? Give us a little preview.
Absolutely. So the book is called Intelligent Health, and I'm so excited to get to share it with everyone. It's nearly 2 decades in the making, Stephanie, and the concept of it came to me back when I was a practicing physician in internal medicine, and it happened through a series of different experiences that I had, but one that I talk about in the book is the story of a young woman, Elena, who had been hospitalized for uncontrolled diabetes, so really high blood sugars that can really be life-threatening and fatal. The team had managed to control her diabetes, and now I was kind of seeing her in the follow-up clinic. We'd kind of take care of her in the hospital, and we were following up after the hospital to make sure that she had all her medications, she had all her appointments. And when I was looking at her chart, and this is now, I'm now dating myself because this is back when we were on paper and pen. So I was literally looking through her physical chart.
Which is not as long ago as it should be.
I know, but I feel kind of dated when I say that. I'm like, there was a time where we actually had these
Paper.
physical charts. But if you looked at her chart, it kind of read like an indictment, which is unfortunately how we spoke about some people. It was like she is non-compliant. She has come into the hospital multiple times with these high blood sugars. And as I was looking at this, I kind of had the script in my head. I'm like, okay, this is what we're going to do to make sure that her blood sugars are under control. We're going to then get her to nutritional counseling to make sure she's eating the right foods. I'm going to talk to her about activity levels. So I just kind of like, I had the script that I was running through my head. And I enter the room. I'm talking to her about this beautiful plan that I had, which was going to save her life. And as I looked at her, she was disengaged and she was kind of staring down at her feet. And I'm like, I'm giving her this great plan. Why is she not more excited and on board on this? And almost as an afterthought, Stephanie, I asked her when I finished, I said, how do you feel about this plan? And she never made eye contact. She continued to look down and she started sharing with me that she had recently lost her job, therefore her insurance. She was living in her car. And so she couldn't actually get the insulin that needed to be refrigerated. She couldn't walk because she wasn't in a safe
Right.
neighborhood. She couldn't eat healthy foods. And so I kind of watched this whole plan that I had unravel. And at that point, it kind of came crashing down on me that here we are trying to solve people's care problems without having any context or understanding of their life context. And it turns out that that life stuff, the air that we breathe, the food that we eat, the stress that we carry, our habits, our genetics, that's 80% of what determines our health. And so at that point, I was like, gosh, wouldn't it be great if we could bring this 20%, which is care, with that 80% and be able to look at people holistically. And so that's the concept between intelligent health.
And you talk about in the book this difference between sick care and health care, right? And you are describing in this story a different way of looking at a person and looking at a person not just through the lens of the care plan you can put together, but all of the other things that might be going on in their life that is preventing them from really thinking about their health as a priority. So let's maybe talk a little bit more about that, like where healthcare really should begin with the person. And you talk a lot about that in this book. It's something you and I have spent time talking about in our previous journeys together at Oracle Health and Cerner. So let's kind of dig in on what does it mean to be a little more human minded, a little bit more person oriented in healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is where, Stephanie, I know you and I share a passion for looking at the world through the person's lens, through the consumer's lens, and making sure that we are creating a future that is person centric, that is consumer centric, and in our specific kind of area of passion and interest, that we're building health around that person. I have not been crazy about using the term patient. I think that the way that that patient is used focuses on the person having a lot of patience. Waits The patient waits to get a call back from the office. The patient feels like they did not get heard or understood. I moved from patient to person, and more recently, through a lot of the conversations that we've had, honestly, you've kind of challenged me to think about the consumer. And I love that term, not because I think that health and care are like the clothes that we buy or the foods that
Right.
we purchase, but because the term consumer means that you have engagement, you have empowerment. And that places us in a very different space and on equal footing with the systems that we have to engage with, which I fundamentally believe in. Because a consumer can say, you cannot treat me this way. A consumer can say, I will not wait an hour and a half,
Right.
right? And that pushes us in healthcare to take more accountability about the systems that have been built and what we need to do to actually bring them forward. I also want to go back to the point that you brought out around sick care and healthcare. And again, this is where I really appreciate and find Merge's leadership in this space, both aspirational and inspirational, because we spend so much time focused around care and sick care, that we need louder voices and visionary leadership around care happens when we fail at health. Now, there are rare cases where there are traumatic accidents or diagnoses, and those cases care is unavoidable and absolutely necessary. But the majority of the time in this country where care happens, we have failed at health. We have failed to prevent illness, whether it is a cancer, an autoimmune disease, a metabolic disorder, cardiovascular disease, all of the major comorbidities that people have. The large majority of that happens because we've failed at health. And again, this kind of reminds me of another kind of quick story. When I was in my corporate job, my team and the organization was global. So there were times where I would start my day at 5 a.m. Pacific time where I live, and there would be days that I would have over 20 meetings, back to back Zoom meetings. And I found that on those days when I started early and I had back to back meetings, that invariably by about 10:30, I would sneak my phone under the table while I was in a meeting, and I would go to my favorite food delivery app, and I would be looking at, like, do I want that artisanal donut that just opened around the
The
corner?
answer is yes, obviously.
It's like, do I want that chocolate cake? Do I want that slice of pie? I would always go for something that was, high fat, high sugar. And it was so I went back because you know me, like, I love data, so I went back and looked, and, like, this was statistically you could count on this, that when these 2 things happened, early morning meetings and back to back, that I would be ordering something that was definitely not good for my health.
Mhm.
Now, my food delivery app also knew that 95% of the time, I actually ordered the salmon bowl. I got the lentil soup. I got all this other stuff the 95% of the time. I ordered those between 12 and 2 p.m. And so, what occurred to me after doing this enough times, where I experienced the negative health side effects of this lifestyle behavior, I realized that my calendar was digitized, my food delivery was digitized. All of this data could have come together. And on a day when these two conditions of early meetings and back to back are together, I could have received a message at like 10 a.m. that would say something like, "Hey, Nasim, it looks like you're having a really tough day. How about we order you a salmon bowl?" Before I would start getting those cravings. I still as a consumer have the right to say, "No, I really want the chocolate cake." But I think given that, option and having that cognitive load taken off of me, I would have chosen differently enough times that it would have made a difference in my long-term health.
When I think what you're painting with that story, other than it's extremely relatable, and I very much want a donut now, I think that, what you're painting there is kind of to connect a couple dots back to what you said around consumer, what we're talking about around what whole human marketing really means. How do you help people make healthier choices because they are empowered with information in a moment that they can act on it? That is whole human marketing. That is thinking about how do you take a message by using data and intelligence about a person that is not just their care plan, that is not just, to your first story, the 20% of things that are happening in a care moment, but the 80% of things that are going on in our day and our lives all of the time. And, I think you said about patience that it requires a lot of patience. And I love that so, so much. I was on in a different conversation not too long ago where I was asked the question, with as much changes going on in technology, should consumers just be patient? And the usage of that word, right? Should consumers just be patient because these things are changing? And my answer was no, they should be absolutely impatient, right? Everyone has been patient already. And what I think is really fascinating about the way that you frame that is that I think my reaction to that question was as much about saying, no, we have a right to information, as it was about the lens change to consumers are choice makers, right? And being a choice maker changes the way that we look at health. So, as far as I'm concerned, the more impatient we are as consumers, the more we're going to accelerate some of these changes that we see in healthcare. That will be a catalyst for driving change. So, does that resonate with the way that you also are seeing and using language differently to bring that consumer thinking into your own terminology and the way that you frame what is a patient, what is a human, what is a person?
I mean, as you can attest to this, words matter, right? And how we frame things really sets expectations for what we want to see. You and I had the opportunity and the privilege through Merge's leadership to pull together executives
Mhm.
across different fields and industries in healthcare, from providers to payers to pharma and med tech. And I think what was really interesting to me, Stephanie, out of the 9 different executive level board meetings that we had, that across industries too, people are thinking this way and are pushing this way. So this isn't solely a responsibility of healthcare delivery systems, because I feel like sometimes we forget that the ecosystem of health and care is really big. It's providers, it's payers, it's pharma, it's medtech, it's retail, pharmacy retail, it's food and beverage. It's a broad scope of stakeholders. It was fascinating to me to hear pharma talk just as passionately about what do we need to do to get the right information to the right person? That payers were talking about, how can we partner? How can we collaborate with our members to be able to get them what they need? That MedTech is thinking, again, while they're thinking B2B, they're also very much thinking B2C. How do we get to the consumer? So I'm thrilled and excited to see that we are all thinking about this. And I think right now is the time for action around how do we take all these thoughts and pilots and really look at scaling it and fundamentally kind of changing the fabric of health and care in this country.
When you just laid out, a number of pieces of that ecosystem, whether you're talking about payers or you're talking about research or you're talking about healthcare proper, and that ecosystem being so much bigger than what we would think of just in those categories, but it's also, I think, a representation of some of the challenges that we have around the data in order to make something like a real intelligent healthcare system work. Is all of those pieces of the ecosystem grew up in very siloed ways, with transactional systems really being misused as a system of interaction instead of just a system of record. And so there's a lot of things that, if you live in a technology world, if you live in a healthcare industry world, need to be solved in order to get to this better future. And, as you're saying, I think that we are in a moment where not only are the forces of what's technically possible aligning, but also people's needs and demands and kind of, the feeling of the moment. So let's talk a little bit more about technology explicitly. I know it bonds us. So we are geeks at heart, right? So I get very excited talking about technology, but I think, one of the interesting dynamics in healthcare is that technology is one of those perfect examples of where the poison is also the cure, right? Some of the challenges and problems I was just describing about the way healthcare technology systems have evolved are some of the problems we have to fix, but the ways that we're going to fix them is through new technology, right?
So I think, I always say our technologies aren't going to be panaceas for the problems that we have in healthcare. However, technology is the most powerful tool we have available to us sitting here in 2026. And if we use it intentionally, it absolutely can address the gaps that we have in health and care. I mean, it's amazing to me, Stephanie, but hopefully you will be shocked because this should be shocking to any intelligent person. I recently got a hand x-ray for my daughter, and the ordering physician was like, yeah, you can go here, you can get the x-ray done. Can you have them burn it onto a CD so then I can look at it and read it myself? And I was like, how are we still doing this? Like,
Yeah. Your daughter was like, "What is a CD?" Right?
it's just this is not stuff that like it's not even technology that they know what it
Yeah.
is. I had to like explain to her afterwards. I'm sweet talking the tech about like, can you please burn it now so I don't have to come back again because it's like a whole process, right? Like I had to fill out a
Mm-hmm.
form. And I would submit it and then they would do it. I would come pick it up. I'm like, can you please do it now? My daughter's like, why? What are we doing? And many healthcare institutions still use fax. Like it just again, it blows my mind, and and that really points to the fact that we do have a technology problem in healthcare, not because we don't have access to technology and there aren't innovative things that are happening. There's robotic surgery that happens with people being thousands of miles away. There are ways that we are leveraging technology to do drug discovery. There are areas where we are far advanced. And then there are things like you go to a doctor's office and the doctor is running late and you're waiting in the waiting room for an hour and a half. And it baffles my mind when I can track when a book that I order, where it is, and when it's going to get to me, that I can track my food, that I can track my transportation. I have zero clue outside of just sitting and waiting to know when I can expect my doctor. There's a lot I could do in an hour and a half if I know that the doctor is running late. And again, I'm not judging the the lateness because I'm sure it's justified, but as the consumer,
Yeah.
ways that I should know that. But yeah, that technology piece, again, it's available. We just have to intentionally leverage it to solve these problems that we've been talking about.
Well, and I think, again, to kind of connect the dots to the conversation on the consumer and your point about many industries thinking this way, I think one of the downsides of regulated industry in particular, and not just healthcare, but any regulated industry, is that sometimes the things that are put in place for protection, for safety, become the inhibitor for embracing things quickly, right? Things are slower because of that. And I think in some of those examples, when you think about burning a CD or, using a fax machine, if any other consumer experience resulted in someone telling you that they need to burn a CD to give you information about your hotel stay or about, your car is at the mechanic and we're going to give you some information about the diagnosis of your car, you would think that was bananas, right? And this is back, I think, to the point of choice. We as consumers connote choice, right? So that is inherent in thinking about what it means to be a consumer. And regulated industries, by and large, healthcare in particular, has to change that lens to remember that they do have customers, right? That you do need to acquire them, you do need to convert them, you do need to retain them, that there is a model that consumer born industries just have in their DNA. Whereas regulated industries, I think there are legitimate additional hurdles. But what has always, I think, really, I don't have a solution for, but I know that there is a way around, is that we spend a lot of energy working on preventing bad things and not a lot of energy on ensuring the good things. And sometimes that can be at odds, right? Is how do you make sure that you are putting the right protocols in place, that you have the right regulations to protect privacy and safety and all of the things that are critically important, but also are giving thought to how do you make it easier for people to do their jobs? How do you
Yeah.
put things in place that encourage the best outcomes, not just prevent bad outcomes?
Yeah, I talk about this in the book about the evolution that needs to happen for regulators and policymakers. We can move forward at an expedited pace and be accountable and responsible. But the regulatory landscape does need to evolve because whereas there was a time where you had to wait for passive reporting of negative outcomes, today you have real time data, especially when it comes to health and care. You can really track what's happening in the real world and be able to more proactively, with predictive modeling, anticipate where are you going to have issues and where do you need to safeguard and where can you kind of move forward and be able to advance the benefits to society. So I do think that the regulatory landscape does need an evolution just like every other major stakeholder because the availability of data, information, and the power to make different decisions is fundamentally different today than it was a decade ago.
I really love what you're saying because I think it very much mirrors a lot of what we're talking about in technology as well, which is that these are not binary things,
Yeah.
right? There's nuance. And so, the more information that we have, the smarter we can get with targeting even regulation. Like things do not need to be one size fits all kinds of solutions anymore. We have the information and the power to use that information to get much more targeted, whether we're talking about precision medicine or precision regulation. This is about how do you use data in a way that lets you get more nuance, get more targeted, and maybe not create such a blanket amount of friction that holds back innovation or holds back some of this technological advancement that we could be seeing. What do you think are some of the forces that are at play? You know, we're talking about this being a moment and really believing it is in the world around us, in what we're seeing with evolution of technology. But, you know, could you describe some of the things that you think are coming together to create this kind of perfect moment?
Yeah, I think this is, for me, having been in healthcare now for 2 decades, this is such an incredibly exciting time, Stephanie, because I feel like that there is the technology piece that we talked about where, again, we know healthcare has a fundamental technology problem, and we have the tools that honestly, again, weren't available a decade ago, right? Weren't available when I was practicing on paper charts. But alongside that, the consumer movement that we talked about is alive, well, and strengthening again. There is a what over $200 billion industry in consumer health where people are saying, I'm going to take ownership and I'm going to pay out of pocket to try and be healthier. And the majority of that is focused on health. I think that's a force that has to be reckoned with and has to be considered with the consumer no longer accepting putting up with the status quo. Now, the part that's challenging with that and we have to figure out is that like most things that enables people who have choice and options to leverage those choices and options, and not everyone gets to participate in that consumer economy, and I'd love to chat about that some more later. But along with those two forces of the technology and the movement towards consumerism, I think the last piece that's absolutely critical is the economic state that we are currently in. Healthcare is no longer affordable for the individuals, for the employers, and for government. There was a Kaiser Family Foundation study that was done around the high percentage of people who are foregoing critical medical care because of their concern about the cost of care. So we have an access problem to begin with, but layered on top of that is, hey, can I afford this? Again, we know that bankruptcy secondary to healthcare costs is a very real thing, unfortunately, for many families. For employers, people are in boardrooms are talking about how they can actually help contain the cost of healthcare because it's taking away from their ability to put money into research and development, into innovation, into expanding and growth into new markets. And then on the government level, I mean, we're spending again upwards of 18% of our GDP that could be also spent on everything from infrastructure to research and development, and ultimately a workforce, a population that is sick is not going to be able to innovate and be productive. A healthier population is going to out innovate and be far more productive, as well as lead happier, fuller lives. And so we're kind of at this breaking point where we have to do something fundamentally different.
I really like the way you describe those three forces. So, kind of the economic positioning, the wave of new consumer empowerment that is growing, and this advancing our technological power. One of the things that I really like about the way that we've been discussing the consumer and consumer health is also that it's not just about the patient, but it's the users of the system in total as well. So even the healthcare professionals are consumers of healthcare. To your point on the costs and how we think about how can we move some of what we're paying for already more upstream into creating more proactive health in the long run. One of the things that has always been kind of a striking challenge for me is that you look at the costs, which are outpacing people's ability to pay them. But in the end, they will get paid. They just will get paid in the wrong way. If we're pushing people out the door because they're there for something perhaps preventative, or they're there for management of an issue, and they're going to come back when it is acute, and it's going to get handled by somebody and be paid for by somebody at some point. That is also, I think, one of the things when we talk about the way you paint the picture of intelligent health is more about how not only do you move things into more healthcare instead of sick care, but understand that there are vast populations of people that need access. And how do we think about how technology might be able to help with some of those challenges as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, in the book, I talk about intelligent health for everyone because I strongly believe that both from a moral perspective and an economic perspective, it is beneficial for us to be able to take care of everybody and to provide the health and care that everyone needs. And we know that not everyone has equal access. So we have people living in rural areas in this country who don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables or don't have access to lean proteins. Well, the incidence and the ability to manage chronic diseases like diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, again, the things that ail us and lead to high mortality, those become really difficult to manage if you don't have access to some of these foods. So, one of the ways that technology can be leveraged for that while we are trying to figure out how do we bring in what is needed in those communities. And I give a lot of props to that there were a number of major retailers that you and I got to work at before that we're looking at like it's not our business model to have fresh fruits and vegetables, but we're gonna bring it in because we're the closest retailer and potential grocer to people's homes unless they want to drive over an hour to have access to things. So I think there's a lot of really great leadership that's happening in this space broadly. But how technology can help is that AI understanding that one has chronic illnesses like heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, and sees the purchasing pattern of regularly buying potato chips, you can kind of take that burden from the individual and suggest, hey, once a week or twice a week, again, it depends on the consumer. Can you go for the baked chips versus the potato chips? Or can you get the potato? Here's a really great mashed potato recipe or a baked potato recipe. We can leverage AI to be context aware about what you have access to. So if you live in a multi-generational home and you don't have a safe space to be able to have your activity and your steps, can the AI understanding that context realize that where you go to work every day actually does have safe spaces around there and suggest, hey, can you get to work 15 minutes earlier just so you can take 10-minute walk around that space? Or here are some chair exercises that you can do within a very small square footage at home so that you can actually stay active and be able to get the benefits that you would. So I think, one of the great things about intelligent health for everyone is that this is not going to be one size fits all. And AI has the ability, understanding the context, to personalize what the need of the individual is, both based on their clinical conditions, but more importantly, their life context to get that outcome that they need.
Yeah, and the way that you're talking about AI, inherently in the way that you're talking about it right now, it is AI amplifying consumer choice,
Yeah.
amplifying the empowerment of the individual to make choices, to have information. And one of the things that for me, and here at Merge in particular, that has been really exciting for me coming out of Oracle Health, where we were doing a lot of work on system of record and all of the things that still need to get solved down in that transaction layer. But what struck me was that there's so many things that we could be doing on the system of interaction layer that AI now empowers us to be able to translate to people in languages that they understand. And I don't just mean translating language, but like in words that they understand, right? Even the example of the first story that you gave, like being able to speak to somebody in a way that resonates with their entire culture, their circumstances, their context, being context aware. I think that people get very nervous and fearful about what AI can do with their data or what it could do to be disruptive instead of helpful. And I get really excited about the fact that, we've been looking forever for a solution of how to take very complex topics, very difficult to understand conversations about medicine, about our bodies. These are very complex pieces of equipment that we're walking around in. AI now can do that translation work for us. It can help make those messages resonate in a way that isn't something that would have been very, very difficult and very, very time consuming, if at all possible, to do with humans. And so, like, all of the examples you're giving to me are such fantastic examples of how AI really does augment the human, not replace their role in decision making, but in giving them the right amount of information so that they can make better choices in the moment. Does that fit with the way you are thinking about intelligent
Yeah,
health?
absolutely. I think you've hit on a fundamental challenge in today's world, which is we have long kind of surpassed the human being's cognitive ability to process all the information that's out there and digitized about us. You look at all of the information that exists in electronic health records about our clinical states, from notes to labs to imaging. Then you look at people have apps and wearables that track everything from activity to nutrition to mood, hormonal levels. There is so much data that if you sit there and you try to correlate one thing to something else, like we're just not built that way to statistically be able to see signal out of the noise. And AI gives us the ability to bring that data together and actually create intelligence out of it and be able to see where are those signals that are really critical for us to respond to. And then to your point, Stephanie, to translate that in a language that is motivating and action provoking in us. Like, if I was to guess, I'd say you'd probably want something that is very data driven. Someone else may want something that is just very kind, compassionate, and is not really providing data, but just kind of like telling them what they need to do.
Right.
And it can kind of personalize to that, right? It can personalize to someone like you who's highly analytical and wants to understand what's behind it all
Tell
the
me
way.
why. Yes.
I just need to know what I need to do. Okay, I need to drink more water. Great. I need to take another 1,500 steps. And then it also gets us out of the one size fits medicine or the one size fits health
Mhm.
solution never made sense to me. Like, it never made sense that we all need to walk 10,000 steps. We all need to drink 8 cups of water. Like, it's not, there's going to be something that works for you and your biology that will be different than for me. And we now, through big data, can say, hey, for you, this is what you need to do. And this is what you need to do today. Maybe different a week from now or a year from now.
I am a yoga instructor, so that is my big frames of reference. And one of the things that I learned when I was getting my training certification, the way that they described it in yoga, there are some traditional cues that people give when you're practicing yoga. And I learned in my teacher training that, the physiology, it's very obvious again, but our physiology is completely different human to human, right? So what they were describing is when you give a traditional cue, in yoga, the length from your wrist to your elbow, from your elbow to your shoulder is different than mine, even proportionately speaking, right? And so a cue that tells you how to go into chaturanga in a certain particular way is going to work for one body and maybe won't work for another body. And the way they described it was to think about the intricacy of a German made clock. It's cogs and wheels, and if you change just one tiny thing about one tiny cog in that clock, the clock is not going to work the same anymore. And all of our bodies are just like different artisan made clocks, with all of their own little specialty cogs. And so I think, like you're saying, our frame of reference is always at this standardized base. And we now have the ability to go beyond that kind of standardized, genericized, averaged out kind of information into something that really speaks more to your artisan clock, right? Like exactly how your body works.
Yeah, I love that analogy, and that really rings true to me when I think about the intricacies in which bodies work and are optimized. I'm gonna steal that one.
I think as soon as I heard it, it wasn't mine. So I'm just sharing it as well. But it really clicked, it really made it make sense. So, this is really overall, it's a new mental model that we're talking about, right? This isn't just let's roll out some new technology in the hospitals and we're all done here and we give consumers a new app and they're all happy and they have their data. This is really a different way of thinking entirely. So, it's we at Merge talk about AI as a paradigm shift overall, but this is a different mental model for the healthcare community as well. So, what are some of the things that you think about in terms of what are people going to need to embrace differently as part of this mental model shift?
Yeah, I think first of all, I want to kind of echo and emphasize your framing around this being a mental model, because I do think that a lot of times people are looking at, I've got a problem in healthcare, or I've got 100 problems in healthcare. Let me throw this solution at it and see if
Mhm.
it gets better versus again, this is a tool. It is an incredibly powerful tool, but it is a tool. And how we intentionally use it, the cultural evolution that needs to happen, the rethinking of our work that needs to happen is what's going to determine if this is successful or not. So I think to your question, one key piece for me is flexibility of mind. One of the questions I get frequently when I'm talking about AI in healthcare is, um, do you think there's going to be doctors in the future? Or like some variation of that. Like,
Right.
will doctors have jobs?
Right.
Should I tell my kid to go to medical school? And I always tell people, I'm like, I really hope that we do not have healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, staff, seekers. I hope that we do not have people doing the same stuff in 5 to 10 years. I hope we don't, because I never went to medicine thinking, I want to practice the way people did 20 years ago. I went to medicine thinking, I want to make health and care better for people. And if that is your goal, you will always need people who are going to continue to be in this field to think about how they help support the consumer of health and care towards better health. And so I think I hear this fear in people's voices around, gosh, what is this going to mean for what I do? It's going to mean everything, and it should. You should be fundamentally thinking differently about what you do and think about what that future state looks like. I think it opens up a lot of room for innovators and for people to really take a leadership role. I think there's such tremendous business opportunity if you're willing to think differently about this, but it does take that flexibility of mind to be able to get there.
Yeah, you gave me chills when you were talking about why you went into medicine because I think that, that the growth mindset, the desire to continue to make things better, that is a core value that I think you hold, I think you demonstrate. But I think it is a core value that is required for this new mental model, too, as you're saying, right? It is, do you have plasticity in thinking? Are you willing to try to throw away maybe what was, we get muscle memory around, so it makes it easy, but it isn't the best way to do it? And are you willing to be open minded about continuing to try to evolve? What does health look like? So I think that that is a core trait that we're going to see. The people who are open, interested, and excited about embracing all these new possibilities are going to be the ones who make these breakout moments possible with all these different forces coming together. Um, one of the things that I really love about you, and I feel like is one of the things that bonded us as we met and worked on our Cerner Oracle Health chapter together, and now into Merge, and now into your book, is that you come from practice. And I think that there is so much misinformation in the world today. It's easy to get the wrong answers around what is happening with AI, what is changing in healthcare. It's easy to be afraid. And I think that one of the best things that I could encourage everybody as they're listening to this is get their information from you. Read the book. Like, this is good information that you can trust and that is coming from somebody that both understands technology but has lived this world, that lives this world, and went into medicine, went into care for all of the right reasons. So I'm very excited to be talking with you about this today. I think, before we kind of close, is there anything else that you want to make sure we talk about? Because you have so many rich takeaways in the book. I know we're not going to get to all of them, but is there anything else that stands out that you want to make sure that listeners get the advantage of hearing?
We've kind of been talking about this in different ways, but I just wanted to say it as clearly as possible. The future of health and care is not going to be built by hospitals and health systems or by tech companies or pharma or the next app or the wearable. It is going to be built based on the relationship between people and their own data. And so the more you get to understand, how do I own this data? How do I leverage it? The further you're going to be on ensuring the kind of health and care that you want. Again, thankfully, we now have the technologies that enable us to do this more and more. But you, as the consumer of health and care today, sitting here in 2026, you have the power to determine how this story unfolds.
I am so excited to see this get out into the world. I'm so proud of you for writing it. I'm so glad that we're getting a chance here to talk about it. And I really do hope everybody picks it up because there is too much bad information out there. Let's read something that we know is coming from a great place with really credible information. So thank you so much, Nasim.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.